Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with KC native and current New York City jazz bassist Craig Aiken. He was born and raised in Oklahoma, then made his way to the University of Kansas, and that led to a 10-year career from 97 to 2007. He learned from KC jazz luminaries like Bowman and Gerald Spaits and played countless shows, thousands of them. From there, he would move on to New York City and learn under bass legend Ron Carter. Since that time, he has played in thousands of shows and remains very active with his band called Roosevelt Dime out of Brooklyn, New York. He's got some great stories, a great Kansas City lineage, and much more. So dig this interview, my friends.
Hey, thanks, Craig, for taking some time out for me today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm excited to do it.
So let me go ahead and dive in here and ask you, first of all, what has been going on lately with you?
Well, I am pretty busy playing bass with a band called Roosevelt Dime, and we are based in Brooklyn, New York. So that's a pretty full-time endeavor. You know, we're on the road probably 80 to 90 shows a year, and then when we're home, we have pretty much an endless amount of work behind the scenes. So that's been pretty exciting. And as far as my home life, my wife and I are now the owners of a two-family home built in 1880. So it keeps me busy.
Yeah.
And we have a pair of tenants, and so we're playing the landlord game as well. So it's all good.
Right on, man. Tell me about, do you got any recordings that you're releasing or that you've released lately?
I do, not under my own name, however, but I'm on quite a bit of stuff here in the New York City area, but yeah, nothing under my own name, but just being a go-to sideman in the Northeast acoustic roots community and some jazz. But yeah, there's always something coming out, it seems like.
Right on. Well, your roots began in Kansas City before you made it to New York. So talk to me about your life here in Kansas City, being born and bred and all of that. What was your Kansas City experience like?
Yeah, well, I was actually born in Oklahoma.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't know that, but I landed in Lawrence to finish my degree in music education at the University of Kansas. So I was there from 93 to 97, and in that time, I started playing upright bass, and in that window of time, I was coming into Kansas City to get lessons with Gerald Spaits and Bowman, and so that kind of slowly, or not even slowly, it kind of actually quickly led to subbing for those guys in the Kansas City scene. So right around the summer of 97, I was finishing up school, and then I found myself playing quite a bit, about 5 or 6 gigs a week, and so I just sort of I went that route, and I never looked back. Instead of I was planning on going into the school system to teach music and instrumental music and everything, but that sort of got sidetracked when I found myself being busy playing on the Kansas City scene.
That had to be a great learning experience with those two, with Gerald and Bob. They have so many years of experience to lend.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and very different personalities and very different musically, and it was a great experience, and and they were working quite a bit then, and still are, but I was very fortunate that they needed subs quite often, so I was somebody that they knew they could turn to, and was largely available at that time, and at least somewhat reliable and responsive.
Yeah. What was it about the Kansas City scene? What did the Kansas City scene give to you that groomed you so much to move on to New York City and to just move on to the next level of your career?
Well, in Kansas City, I was fortunate to pretty much play with, I mean, nearly everybody on the blues and jazz scene. You know, that's a huge scene. It's just such a huge pool of musicians of all ages and levels of experience. You know, for my 10 years that I was on the Kansas City scene, which was 97 to 2007, I averaged 6 gigs a week that whole time and just playing with nearly everybody. And so I was just getting so many different experiences all the time and learning new music all the time and just sort of being thrown in the deep end on the bandstand all the time, you know. So I got pretty good experience of learning how to play with a new band every night. And I mean, I think one of the best things I took away from Kansas City is I backed up so many vocalists. That gave me great experience to bring to New York of just being a good listener on the bandstand and like a compassionate player for the other musicians, especially the vocalists around me, and kept my ears open all the time, and just open-minded, musically speaking, and yeah, I was, you know, very happy to have been able to get that experience there.
So growing up in Oklahoma, what gave you that itch to get into music and more specifically jazz?
Well, I was born into a somewhat musical family. My mother was a piano teacher and piano accompanist in the local community in the local school district. So I came up under her, watching her do what she did, and she provided me with many opportunities to play at a young age. You know, back when I was little, I started on piano around 3rd grade, and then once I got into the public school system, I picked up the trumpet simply because there was one laying around the house. And so that was my primary instrument from 6th grade through college. And you know, in Oklahoma, we had a pretty strong music program in the public schools and a lot of support. And so, you know, I was playing in many ensembles starting in 6th grade, and they also, you know, one of those ensembles, they had the jazz band, or the stage band, I think they called it back then. And so I just started really loving the music by playing in the trumpet section in the school bands, and I continued playing trumpet into high school, and then that's when I just found a new interest in learning to play guitar. So there was always a guitar around the house, so I would noodle on it every now and then and play it in church every now and then with my mom. But then in high school, I got into electric guitar, and then I was studying theory and harmony on that, and then that sort of led to playing guitar in the high school jazz band. And there, I was always one to volunteer to play a solo in the songs. And so then I would go home and I would take the music and the chart, and I would study the changes based on what I was learning in my guitar lessons. And then I would sort of kind of come up with a solo that worked around those changes. I wouldn't really write it down, but I would sort of just play through. I would learn what the changes, like the notes and the chords, and sort of just not write down, but sort of memorize a solo based around those changes. And so I wasn't quite improvising at that time, but I got a lot of experience, you know, playing guitar in the high school. And so, you know, that eventually led to playing electric bass at my first college that I went to in Colorado.
So let me ask you this. When you were growing up, were there any jazz albums that you remember that really left an impression on you?
Well, around the house, my parents were more into like the European classical composers, you know, all the Bachs and Beethovens and call them Mozarts, and
Sure.
and so I mean they may have had a Dave Brubeck album around here and there, but I wasn't really listening to it, and so I was largely just playing the jazz in the school bands, in the school programs, but, not really listening to it. But then I think in high school, someone gave me a Miles Davis cassette. It was the Tutu record, I remember, and I hated it at first. And I later on I realized I just wasn't ready for it. But then I think because of being given that Miles cassette, it led me to check out somehow. It led me to Chick Corea. I'm not exactly sure how now, but I remember that, and I had a couple of other friends that were into Chick Corea, and then I got obsessed with the Chick Corea Electric Band, because that would have been in the late 80s, right when they were on fire. So, yeah, I mean, most of my record collecting of jazz came in college, and then at that point I got obsessed with it.
So, speaking of college, you talked about the University of Tulsa, talked about KU. What did you learn in a formal environment that was so instrumental in your path as a musician? What do you remember the most?
I think a big thing I took from that is, not only some basic pedagogy of working with other musicians, and like I do to this day, but patience. It gave me a lot of patience. I guess because nobody learns. No two people learned at the same rate and the same way. So as far as teaching or conducting or whatever, I got a lot of patience out of it. But also, my degree was in music education, but also I was playing in so many ensembles that were available at KU. And so I think that's largely what I took is a lot of experience from playing in so many ensembles of different kinds, and that sort of led to playing in the town of Lawrence, doing all kinds of random jazz gigs, and which led me naturally to the Kansas City scene and lessons with those guys, and then subbing for those guys, and then eventually just on to my own gigs in my own bands.
Let's talk a little bit about the education that you got from Ron Carter. That had to be hugely monumental for you.
Yeah, it was. It was a heavy experience every time I went to his place in the Upper West Side. Yeah, he's very passionate about teaching, and he only teaches somebody if he really feels it will be worthwhile for him, and so I feel like I passed an audition just for the fact that he continued working with me. And yeah, I felt super inspired at the end of each lesson. I would walk out of his place and rolling my instrument down Broadway in New York and to the train, just completely, it just felt like I just came out of a surreal experience. And yeah, I still think about it. It's been many years since I did study with him, but all the time I think about, my basic hand position and my upper body technique and things, and just, he has very high standards, musically speaking, and he gets that out of his students in a big way.
You've moved on from there, from Kansas City, from formal education, learning with Ron, and you've played almost 4,000 gigs. You just talked about with Roosevelt Dime how much you play. What do you learn? What do you get out of all of these experiences with traveling? What does that do for you as a musician? How does it add to what you do?
Good question. Well, now I would say 90% of my traveling is with Roosevelt Dime, one particular band of 4 guys. It's pretty much all I'm doing right now. I'm able to fill in the cracks of our time off, with other things based around New York City. But I mean, now I'm working with those four guys, practically full time, and so that's quite a big difference from doing about 17 years of strictly freelancing. And so and I wanted that. I wanted to sort of go a different avenue and be able to put all my energy and focus into one or two projects. And I'm really enjoying the process because it allows me to get deep inside the music on a pretty high level that I never could while I was freelancing, because now I'm living with this music, day in and day out. It's just really refreshing. Every time I go to a gig, I know the music like the back of my hand. And when I was freelancing, it's harder to get to that zone. When I haven't lived with the music very long, or I had just learned it for that particular show,
Yeah.
And, sometimes I would get one shot at playing a set of music, and sometimes two. And I just kind of was interested in putting a lot more energy into one or two projects, simply for just experiencing the feeling of getting deep into the music.
So let me ask you this. You don't just stay in the jazz idiom. You go to pop, folk, rock. You've got to have a nice mix of all kinds of genres that you deal with. How do you separate those, or is it just all music for you?
In some ways it is all music. I'm basically playing my instruments, whether it's electric bass or upright bass. There are different expectations and different subtleties, and it's challenging. It's very challenging, but it's also very rewarding. And, I have to always remember what music I'm playing and who I'm playing it with, and try to deliver it, in the most appropriate way for that given situation. And I'm not always 100% accurate.
Sure.
I record myself a lot and listen back, and sometimes I'm frustrated and sometimes I'm very happy. And it was much more so varied musically when I was freelancing all the time versus, my life now when I'm buried into just two projects. But yeah, I did love that about the freelance world, is that, every day was a new gig and a new chance to try to figure out, how I can deliver my art in, the most appropriate way, musical way.
Well, let me ask you this. Of all of the influences that go into who you are and what you became as a musician to this day, who would you consider your jazz heroes or music heroes?
Yeah, that's great. Right now, my favorite living improviser is Keith Jarrett. So I've sort of been obsessed with his music in trio, not just trio, but, pretty much everything he's done. And so he's a huge inspiration. I love a lot of pop and rock and classic rock. Paul McCartney's a big inspiration, and I get a lot of inspiration from my favorite bass players throughout history, and maybe some of those might be Dave Holland for sure, and Ray Brown and Ron, and all the biggies really. Anybody that I can really feel something from, I am inspired by.
So let me whittle this list down for you. Tell me, if you could get into a time machine, the Jazz DeLorean, and go anywhere and see anybody, who would you go see and why?
I might go see, I would say, Bill Evans with Scotty LaFaro and that trio, because I'm a huge fan of Bill, and Scotty, and the way they, their chemistry and how they played together and that sound that they achieved. And I would love to see that in person. Possibly maybe Joe Henderson and Ron Carter at the Vanguard. Oh my gosh, I can go on.
Yeah, no, those are pretty heavy shows right there for sure. What has been one of the nicest things that a fan has ever said to you? You've played so much prolifically live. Do you remember a compliment someone gave you?
Yeah, lately, with my band Roosevelt Dime, a great compliment that I've gotten probably 3 times in the past couple of years is my playing reminds them of a tuba, like a sousaphone from New Orleans. We play a lot of New Orleans infused Americana. So when somebody comes up and says, I sounded like a tuba, or I'm reminded of a tuba, that's pretty fun. I like that. I do think about the sousaphones of the brass bands in the streets of New Orleans, when I'm playing this Americana rhythm and blues, which is what we do. So that's a recent experience for you.
Right on. So let me ask you this. Everybody has a version of who you are. Your family has a version, your friends, those that you play for. But who do you think you are? When you wake up in the morning, what's your perception of who you are and what you're doing?
Jeez. Right now I have such high priority on being a good husband and a committed band member. I try to work hard on my job duties within the band, but I think I let myself down all the time with that. I place a lot of importance on being a landlord and a homeowner. Yeah, that's a hard question.
That's good. I think you just answered. I think, and it's never an easy question, but I think you answered it for sure. Hey, Craig, thank you for taking some time out for me today and opening up about your story. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad to have done it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Kansas City, New York City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Craig for his time, his stories, and that Kansas City cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.